The early morning sun had barely begun to peek through the curtains of the luxurious Goldstein mansion in Beverly Hills when Esperanza Martinez, a petite woman with kind eyes and calloused hands, made her way to the sprawling kitchen. At 32, she was the head cook for one of the wealthiest families in Los Angeles, a position she had worked tirelessly to achieve since immigrating from Mexico as a teenager. As she tied her apron and prepared to start another day of creating culinary masterpieces, Esperanza couldn't help but smile. Despite the long hours and demanding nature of her job, she loved every moment of it. Cooking wasn't just her profession, it was her passion, her art, and her way of spreading joy to others. Little did she know that this ordinary Tuesday would be the day her world would come crashing down around her. The Goldstein family was known for their extravagant parties, and tonight was no exception. Victoria Goldstein, the family matriarch, was hosting a charity gala for the city's elite. As Esperanza meticulously planned the evening's menu, she heard the clip-clop of expensive heels against the marble floor. "Esperanza!" Victoria's shrill voice echoed through the kitchen. "I need to speak with you immediately." Wiping her hands on her apron, Esperanza hurried to meet her employer. Victoria Goldstein was a statuesque woman in her 50s, with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a face that owed more to her plastic surgeon than to nature. Her cold blue eyes narrowed as she looked down at Esperanza. "Yes, Mrs. Goldstein?" Esperanza asked, her voice tinged with a slight accent. Victoria's lips curled into a sneer. "I've just been informed that my prized diamond necklace is missing from my jewelry box. The very necklace I was planning to wear to tonight's gala. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" Esperanza's eyes widened in shock. "Missing? No, Mrs. Goldstein, I don't know anything about it. Are you sure it's not just misplaced? Are you implying that I don't know where I keep my own jewelry?" Victoria snapped. "Don't play dumb with me, Esperanza. You're the only one who has access to my rooms besides the family. It must have been you." "But Mrs. Goldstein, I would never," Esperanza began, her voice trembling. "Save it!" Victoria interrupted. "I've had my suspicions about you for a while now. Always eyeing the fine things in this house, probably thinking about how you could never afford them on your measly salary. Well, I won't stand for thieves in my home. You're fired. Pack your things and get out immediately." Esperanza felt as if the ground had opened up beneath her feet. "Please, Mrs. Goldstein, there must be some mistake. I've worked for your family for years. I would never steal from you." But Victoria was unmoved. "Security will escort you out. And don't even think about using me as a reference. I'll make sure everyone in Beverly Hills knows what you really are, nothing but a common thief." Tears streaming down her face, Esperanza was roughly escorted from the mansion by two burly security guards. As the gates clanged shut behind her, she found herself standing on the sidewalk, clutching a small box of personal belongings, her dreams and reputation in tatters. For hours, Esperanza wandered the streets of Beverly Hills, her mind reeling from the sudden turn of events. How could this have happened? She had dedicated years of her life to the Goldsteins, often working late into the night to ensure everything was perfect. And now, in the blink of an eye, it was all gone. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the opulent mansions, Esperanza found herself in a small park. Collapsing onto a bench, she finally allowed herself to break down, her body racked with sobs. "Excuse me, miss? Are you all right?" Esperanza looked up, hastily wiping her eyes. A kind-faced man in his late 30s stood before her, concern etched across his features. He was dressed in a police uniform, his badge glinting in the fading light. I'm fine," Esperanza managed to choke out. The officer, whose nameplate read David Thompson, sat down beside her. I don't mean to pry, but you seem far from fine. Is there anything I can do to help? Something about Officer Thompson's gentle demeanor broke through Esperanza's defenses. Before she knew it, she found herself pouring out the whole sordid tale, her years of dedicated service, the missing necklace, and her humiliating dismissal. David listened intently, his brow furrowing as Esperanza recounted Victoria Goldstein's accusations. When she finished, he placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Ms. Martinez, what happened to you today is unacceptable. No one should be treated that way, especially without any evidence. Have you considered filing a wrongful termination suit?" Esperanza shook her head. "Who would believe me over the Goldsteins? They're one of the most powerful families in Los Angeles. I'm just nobody." "You're not nobody," David said firmly. "You're a hardworking woman who's been wronged. And if there's one thing I can't stand, it's injustice. Listen, I have a friend who's a lawyer. He specializes in cases like yours. Why don't you let me give him a call?" For the first time since that morning, Esperanza felt a glimmer of hope. You would do that for me? But you don't even know me." David smiled. "Sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to stand up for what's right. Now, come on. Let's get you somewhere safe for the night, and tomorrow we'll start figuring this out." As Esperanza followed Officer Thompson to his patrol car, she couldn't shake the feeling that this chance encounter was the beginning of something bigger than she could have ever imagined. The next few days passed in a blur for Esperanza. David had introduced her to his friend, Mark Daniels, a scrappy young lawyer with a passion for taking on the rich and powerful. Mark had listened to Esperanza's story with growing interest, his eyes gleaming with the prospect of a challenging case. "Mrs. Goldstein had no right to fire you without proof," Mark had explained. "And the way she did it? That's textbook defamation. We've got a solid case for wrongful termination and slander." But as they delved deeper into the events surrounding Esperanza's dismissal, it became clear that there was more to the story than met the eye. Mark's investigations had turned up some interesting information about the Goldstein family's finances. "It seems Victoria Goldstein has been living well beyond her means," Mark revealed during one of their strategy sessions. "There are rumors of massive gambling debts and some questionable investments. The family's not as wealthy as they'd like everyone to believe." Esperanza frowned. "But what does that have to do with the missing necklace?" David, who had been helping with the investigation in his off hours, leaned forward. "We think the necklace might not have been stolen at all. In fact, we're not even sure it exists." "What?" Esperanza gasped. Mark nodded grimly. "We've been doing some digging. There's no record of Victoria Goldstein ever purchasing a diamond necklace of the value she claimed. And get this, the day after you were fired, she filed an insurance claim for the stolen necklace." "You mean, she made it all up?" Esperanza felt her head spinning. "But why?" "Insurance fraud," David explained. "It's a classic scam. Report a valuable item as stolen, collect the insurance money. But she needed a scapegoat, someone to take the fall. And that someone was me," Esperanza whispered, the full weight of the betrayal crashing down on her. Mark reached across the table, grasping Esperanza's hand. "This changes everything. We're not just fighting for your job anymore. We're exposing a criminal conspiracy. Are you ready for this, Esperanza? It's going to get ugly." Esperanza thought of all the years she had devoted to the Goldsteins, the countless holidays and family events she had missed to cater to their every whim. She thought of Victoria's cruel words, the humiliation of being escorted from the only home she had known in America. Slowly, she nodded. "I'm ready," she said, her voice growing stronger. "They took everything from me. It's time I fought back." As the team began to formulate their plan, none of them could have predicted the storm that was about to engulf Beverly Hills elite society. Esperanza Martinez, the humble cook from Mexico, was about to become the catalyst for a scandal that would shake the foundations of Los Angeles's high society. Meanwhile, across town in her lavish bedroom, Victoria Goldstein tossed and turned, plagued by nightmares of exposure and ruin. Little did she know, her worst fears were about to become reality. The next morning, Esperanza found herself standing outside the imposing gates of the Goldstein mansion once again. This time, however, she wasn't alone. Mark and David flanked her on either side, with a small army of reporters and camera crews behind them. "Are you sure about this?" Esperanza asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. "Absolutely. The best defense is a good offense. We're going to force their hand." David nodded in agreement. "Remember, Esperanza, you have nothing to be ashamed of. You're the victim here, and it's time the world knew the truth." Taking a deep breath, Esperanza pressed the intercom button. After a moment of crackling static, a familiar voice answered. "Goldstein residence. How may I help you?" "This is Esperanza Martinez. I'm here to speak with Mrs. Goldstein." There was a long pause before the voice replied, "I'm sorry, but Mrs. Goldstein isn't receiving visitors at the moment." Mark stepped forward. "This is Mark Daniels, Ms. Martinez's attorney. Please inform Mrs. Goldstein that if she doesn't agree to speak with us immediately, our next stop will be the district attorney's office with evidence of insurance fraud." The intercom went silent. For several tense minutes, nothing happened. Then, with a loud buzz, the gates began to swing open. As they made their way up the winding driveway, Esperanza couldn't help but notice how different everything looked. The manicured lawns and carefully tended flower beds that had once been her pride and joy now seemed cold and artificial. Victoria Goldstein was waiting for them in the grand foyer, her face a mask of barely contained fury. "How dare you come here and threaten me? I'll have you all arrested for trespassing." Mark smiled coldly. "I don't think you want to involve the authorities just yet, Mrs. Goldstein. Not until you've heard what we have to say." For the next hour, the group was sequestered in Victoria's opulent study. As Mark laid out the evidence they had gathered, the suspicious timing of the insurance claim, the lack of proof of the necklace's existence, and Victoria's mounting financial troubles, the color drained from the socialite's face. This is preposterous," Victoria sputtered. "You have no proof." "On the contrary," David interjected, producing a thick folder. "We have bank statements, credit card bills, and testimonies from several of your creditors. Face it, Mrs. Goldstein, the game is up." Victoria's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. Tears welled up in her expertly made-up eyes as she collapsed into a nearby armchair. "You don't understand," she whimpered. "We were going to lose everything. The house, the cars, our status. I had to do something." Esperanza, who had remained silent throughout the confrontation, finally spoke up. "And you thought ruining my life was the answer? I gave you years of loyal service, and this is how you repay me." Victoria had the grace to look ashamed. I'm sorry, Esperanza. I never meant for it to go this far. I was desperate." Mark cleared his throat. "Here's what's going to happen, Mrs. Goldstein. You're going to publicly retract your accusations against Ms. Martinez. You'll provide her with a glowing reference and compensate her for wrongful termination. In return, we won't press charges for fraud." "And if I refuse?" Victoria asked, a hint of her old defiance returning. David stepped forward. "Then I'll have no choice but to arrest you right here and now." Your choice, Mrs. Goldstein. The tension in the room was palpable as Victoria weighed her options. Finally, with a defeated sigh, she nodded. Fine. I'll do it. Just, please, don't let this get out. It would ruin us. As they left the Goldstein mansion, Esperanza felt as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The nightmare was finally over. You did it, Esperanza, Mark said, beaming with pride. You stood up to them and won. David nodded in agreement. Justice prevailed today, thanks to your courage. But as the adrenaline of the confrontation began to wear off, a new worry set in. What do I do now? Esperanza wondered aloud. Even with the reference, who's going to hire me after all this? Mark and David exchanged a knowing glance. Actually, David began, we might have a proposition for you. As they drove away from the mansion, neither Esperanza nor her newfound allies could have predicted the incredible journey that lay ahead, a journey that would take her from the depths of despair to heights she had never dreamed possible. Little did Esperanza know, her story of resilience and triumph was about to capture the hearts of millions, transforming her from a humble cook into a symbol of hope for underdogs everywhere. But that, as they say, is a story for another day. As they drove away from the Goldstein mansion, Esperanza felt a mixture of relief and uncertainty. The nightmare of false accusations was behind her, but the future remained unclear. She turned to David and Mark, curiosity piqued by their earlier exchange. You mentioned a proposition? She asked hesitantly. David smiled warmly. Yes, Esperanza. Mark and I have been talking, and we think we have an idea that could not only help you but also make a real difference in the community. Mark chimed in, his eyes alight with excitement. We've been following a troubling trend in Beverly Hills and the surrounding areas. There's been a surge in cases similar to yours, hardworking immigrants and minorities being taken advantage of by wealthy employers. Most of these people don't have the resources or knowledge to fight back. That's terrible, Esperanza said, her heart aching for those in situations like hers. Exactly, David nodded. And that's where you come in. We're thinking of starting a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping these workers. Legal aid, job placement, educational resources, the works. And we want you to be a part of it. Esperanza's eyes widened. Me? But I'm just a cook. What could I possibly offer? Mark leaned forward, his voice earnest. You're so much more than just a cook, Esperanza. You're a survivor. You've been through the fire and came out stronger. Your story, your experience, it could inspire others to stand up for themselves. Plus, your connections in the service industry could be invaluable. As the proposition sank in, Esperanza felt a spark of excitement ignite within her. For years, she had dreamed of making a difference, of helping others like herself who had come to America in search of a better life. Could this be her chance? I don't know what to say, she stammered. David patted her hand reassuringly. You don't have to decide right now. Take some time to think about it. But know this, we believe in you, Esperanza. We think you could be the voice these people need. Over the next few weeks, as news of the Goldstein scandal broke, Esperanza found herself thrust into the spotlight. Local news stations clamored for interviews, eager to hear the story of the humble cook who stood up to one of Beverly Hills' most prominent families. At first, the attention overwhelmed Esperanza. She had always been content to work behind the scenes, letting her culinary creations speak for her. But as she shared her story, she began to realize the power of her words. People were listening. People cared. One particularly memorable interview stuck with her. The reporter, a sharp-eyed woman named Jessica Chin, had asked her a question that cut to the heart of the matter. Esperanza, what would you say to others who find themselves in similar situations, afraid to speak up against injustice because they feel powerless? Esperanza had paused, considering her words carefully. I would tell them that they are not alone, she had said, her voice growing stronger with each word. That their voice matters, their rights matter. It's scary to stand up to those more powerful than you, but it's scarier to live in fear and silence. We must be brave, not just for ourselves, but for all those who cannot speak up. The response had resonated deeply with viewers. Soon, Esperanza's phone was ringing off the hook with calls from workers sharing their own stories of mistreatment and exploitation. It was then that Esperanza knew she had to accept David and Mark's offer. This was her calling. The next few months were a whirlwind of activity. With David's community connections, Mark's legal expertise, and Esperanza's first-hand experience and growing public platform, they launched the Workers' Justice Alliance. The organization quickly gained traction, offering free legal clinics, know your rights workshops, and job placement services. Esperanza threw herself into the work, drawing on her years in the service industry to connect with workers and employers alike. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. As the Workers' Justice Alliance gained prominence, they began to ruffle feathers among Beverly Hills elite. Anonymous threats started pouring in, warning them to stay in their lane or face consequences. One crisp autumn morning, Esperanza arrived at the small office they had rented for the Alliance to find the windows smashed and crude graffiti sprayed across the walls. "Go back where you came from," screamed one particularly hateful message. As she stood there, surveying the damage with tears in her eyes, a familiar voice called out behind her. "Esperanza? My God, what happened here?" She turned to see Victoria Goldstein standing there, looking shocked and genuinely concerned. The months since their confrontation had not been kind to Victoria. Gone were the designer clothes and perfectly coiffed hair. Instead, she looked tired and drawn, dressed in simple slacks and a plain blouse. "Mrs. Goldstein," Esperanza acknowledged coolly. "What are you doing here?" Victoria shifted uncomfortably. I've been following your work with the Alliance. It's admirable, what you're doing. I came to see if there was any way I could help." Esperanza's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "You want to help? After everything that happened?" Victoria nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "I know I can never fully make up for what I did to you, Esperanza. But seeing you turn that awful experience into something so positive, it's made me realize how wrong I was. About everything. I want to make amends, if you'll let me." For a long moment, Esperanza studied the woman who had once wielded so much power over her life. She saw genuine remorse in Victoria's eyes, and something else, a hint of the scared, desperate woman she had glimpsed that day in the study. Finally, Esperanza sighed. "There's a lot of work to be done here. If you really want to help, grab a broom. We need to clean this mess up before the others arrive." A tentative smile spread across Victoria's face as she nodded eagerly. Together, the unlikely pair began to clean up the vandalism, their shared labor slowly beginning to bridge the chasm between them. As word spread about the attack on the Alliance office, something unexpected happened. Instead of cowering in fear, the community rallied around them. Volunteers poured in, offering to help repair the damage and provide security. Local businesses donated supplies and services. The incident, meant to intimidate and silence them, had instead galvanized support for their cause. Amidst the flurry of activity, Esperanza received a call from an unfamiliar number. The voice on the other end belonged to Jonathan Hayes, the editor-in-chief of the Los Angeles Tribune. "Ms. Martinez," he began, his tone serious. "I've been following your story with great interest. We at the Tribune believe it's time for an in-depth investigation into worker exploitation in the service industry. We want to do a feature series, and we'd like you to be a part of it." Esperanza's heart raced. This was an opportunity to bring their cause to an even wider audience. "I'd be honored, Mr. Hayes." "What did you have in mind?" "We're thinking a 6-part series," Jonathan explained. "Your story would be the centerpiece, but we want to explore the broader issues as well. The impact on families, the economic implications, the legal challenges. We'll need your help to connect with other workers willing to share their stories." As Esperanza listened to Jonathan outline the project, a plan began to form in her mind. This series could be the catalyst for real change, not just in Los Angeles, but potentially across the country. "Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice filled with determination. "I have an idea that might take this series to the next level. What if we didn't just tell these stories, but also showed them? I know some incredible chefs, housekeepers, and other service workers who have faced similar struggles. What if we organized an event, a gala dinner, perhaps, where these workers could showcase their skills while sharing their stories?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, Esperanza feared she had overstepped. Then Jonathan's voice came back, filled with excitement. "Ms. Martinez, that's brilliant. A gala where the servers and chefs are the stars of the show, not just the background. It's perfect. We could invite industry leaders, politicians, celebrities, people who can actually affect change. And we'll cover it all in the final part of our series." As they hashed out the details, Esperanza felt a surge of hope. This was bigger than her now. It was about giving a voice to all those who had been silenced for too long. Over the next few weeks, Esperanza worked tirelessly to bring the gala to life. She reached out to her contacts in the service industry, carefully selecting participants whose stories needed to be heard. Each had faced adversity, unfair treatment, wage theft, discrimination, but had persevered. Victoria Goldstein, true to her word, threw herself into helping with the preparations. Her social connections, though somewhat diminished, proved invaluable in securing a venue and attracting high-profile attendees. The night of the gala arrived, and the grand ballroom of the Beverly Hills Hotel buzzed with anticipation. Celebrities mingled with politicians, while captains of industry chatted with social activists. But the real stars of the evening were the servers, cooks, and other service workers who moved among the guests, their stories printed on elegant cards that accompanied each dish they served. As Esperanza surveyed the room, her heart swelling with pride, she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find David and Mark, both dressed in sharp suits, beaming at her. "You've done it, Esperanza," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "Look around. You've brought all these people together. You're changing lives." Mark nodded in agreement. "And this is just the beginning. The Tribune series is already generating buzz. People are talking about workers' rights in a way they never have before. You've started a movement." Before Esperanza could respond, a hush fell over the room. Jonathan Hayes had taken the stage, microphone in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice ringing out clear and strong. "Tonight, we are here to celebrate the unsung heroes of our society, the hardworking men and women of the service industry. But we're also here to listen, to learn, and to commit ourselves to change." As Jonathan continued his speech, introducing the Tribune's investigative series and calling for reforms in labor laws, Esperanza felt a tap on her arm. She turned to find Maria, one of the servers she had recruited for the event, standing beside her with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," Maria whispered, squeezing Esperanza's hand. "For the first time in my life, I feel seen. I feel valued." Esperanza pulled the younger woman into a tight embrace, her own eyes welling up with tears. This was why she had fought so hard. This was why she would continue to fight. As the evening wore on, Esperanza found herself approached by numerous influential figures, lawmakers promising to push for stronger protections for workers, business leaders pledging to review their labor practices, celebrities offering to use their platforms to raise awareness. But it was a conversation with an unexpected guest that truly drove home the impact of what they had achieved. Esperanza, a familiar voice called out. She turned to find herself face to face with Robert Goldstein, Victoria's husband and the patriarch of the Goldstein family. "Mr. Goldstein," she acknowledged, bracing herself for confrontation. But Robert's face held no anger, only a mix of shame and admiration. "I owe you an apology," he said softly. "What happened to you? It was inexcusable. I should have questioned Victoria's story, should have treated you with the respect you deserved. Seeing all of this tonight, hearing these stories, it's opened my eyes to how blind I've been." Esperanza studied him carefully, searching for any sign of insincerity. Finding none, she nodded slowly. "Thank you, Mr. Goldstein. Your acknowledgement means a lot." Robert hesitated for a moment, then continued. "I want to do more than just apologize. I've been talking with my partners, and we've decided to establish a fund for workers in the service industry. Scholarships, emergency assistance, legal aid, whatever is needed most. We'd like you and the Workers' Justice Alliance to help us set it up and administer it. If you're willing, of course." For a moment, Esperanza was speechless. The offer represented a sea change in attitude from one of Beverly Hills' most influential families. It was more than just a personal victory, it was a sign that real, systemic change might be possible. "Mr. Goldstein," she finally managed, "I would be honored to help. Thank you for taking this step." As Robert walked away, Esperanza felt a sense of completion. The journey that had begun with her unjust firing had come full circle. She had not only reclaimed her own dignity but had paved the way for others to do the same. The gala continued late into the night, a celebration not just of culinary skill, but of human resilience and the power of community. As Esperanza made her rounds, thanking guests and checking on her fellow workers, she couldn't help but marvel at how far she had come. From a humble cook to a voice for the voiceless, she had transformed her pain into purpose. And in doing so, she had sparked a movement that promised to change countless lives. As the last guests departed and the cleanup began, Esperanza stood alone for a moment, taking in the quiet of the now empty ballroom. She thought of all the people who had believed in her, David, Mark, the workers who had trusted her with their stories, and even Victoria, who had found redemption in supporting their cause. She thought of her parents back in Mexico, who had sacrificed so much to give her a chance at a better life. How proud they would be to see what she had accomplished. But mostly, she thought of the future. This gala, the Tribune series, the Goldstein Fund, they were all just the beginning. There was still so much work to be done, so many more lives to touch. As she picked up a stray napkin from a nearby table, Esperanza smiled to herself. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles to fight. But for tonight, she would savor this victory, this moment of hope. Little did she know, the biggest challenge and the greatest opportunity of her life was just around the corner. A challenge that would test her resolve, her principles, and everything she had built. But that, as they say, is a story for another day. The morning after the gala, Esperanza woke to a flurry of notifications on her phone. The Los Angeles Tribune series had launched, and social media was abuzz with discussions about workers' rights and the hidden abuses in the service industry. Her inbox was flooded with messages from workers sharing their own stories, journalists seeking interviews, and even a few politicians requesting meetings. As she scrolled through the messages, still half asleep, one email caught her eye. The sender was unfamiliar, but the subject line made her heart race, urgent corruption at the heart of Beverly Hills. Fully awake now, Esperanza opened the email. It was from someone claiming to be a high-level employee at City Hall. The message was brief but explosive. Ms. Martinez, your work has given me the courage to come forward. There's a network of corruption in Beverly Hills that goes beyond just worker exploitation. City officials, business leaders, even some in law enforcement, they're all involved. I have proof, but I'm scared. Can we meet? Whistleblower. Esperanza's mind reeled. If this was true, it could explain why worker abuse had been allowed to flourish unchecked for so long. But it could also be a trap, a way to discredit her and the Workers' Justice Alliance. She immediately called David and Mark, conferencing them in to discuss the email. This is big, Esperanza, Mark said, his voice tense. If it's true, it could blow the lid off everything. But it's also incredibly dangerous. Whoever this whistleblower is, they're putting themselves at enormous risk. David agreed. We need to be careful. This kind of accusation, it could make us some powerful enemies. Are you sure you want to pursue this? Esperanza took a deep breath. She thought of all the workers who had trusted her with their stories, who had looked to her for hope. Could she turn her back on this, knowing it might help even more people? We have to, she said firmly. If there's even a chance this is true, we owe it to everyone we've been fighting for to investigate. But we'll be smart about it. Mark, can you set up a secure meeting? David, we might need some discreet protection. Over the next few days, as the Tribune series continued to make waves, Esperanza worked with Mark to arrange a safe meeting with the whistleblower. They chose a quiet cafe in a neighboring town, figuring it would attract less attention than anywhere in Beverly Hills. On the day of the meeting, Esperanza arrived early, her nerves on edge. David was stationed outside in an unmarked car, keeping watch. As she sipped her coffee, a middle-aged woman in a nondescript business suit approached her table. Ms. Martinez? The woman asked quietly. At Esperanza's nod, she sat down. I'm Amanda Reeves. I'm the one who sent you the email. Over the next hour, Amanda laid out a tale of corruption that made Esperanza's head spin. According to her, a group of Beverly Hills' most influential figures, including several city council members, prominent business owners, and even a judge, had been working together to maintain their power and wealth at the expense of workers and smaller businesses. They call themselves the Circle, Amanda explained, her voice barely above a whisper. They control everything: which businesses get permits, who gets city contracts, even which cases go to trial. And they use that power to exploit workers, especially immigrants and minorities who are afraid to speak up. But why are you telling me this? Esperanza asked. Why now? Amanda's eyes filled with tears. Because I can't be part of it anymore. I've seen too much, done too much. Your work, the stories in the Tribune, it made me realize I had to do something. But I'm scared, Ms. Martinez. These people, they're powerful, and they're ruthless. Esperanza reached across the table, squeezing Amanda's hand. You've done the right thing. We'll protect you, I promise. But we need evidence if we're going to stop this. Amanda nodded, pulling out a flash drive. It's all here: emails, financial records, even recordings of meetings. But be careful. Once they realize this is missing, they'll do anything to get it back. As Esperanza left the cafe, flash drive securely hidden in her purse, she felt a mix of excitement and fear. This was bigger than anything she had taken on before. It wasn't just about worker rights anymore, it was about the very foundation of power in Beverly Hills. Back at the Alliance office, Esperanza, David, and Mark pored over the files Amanda had provided. The evidence was damning: clear proof of bribery, blackmail, and a systematic effort to keep certain groups marginalized. This is incredible, Mark breathed, his eyes wide as he scrolled through document after document. With this, we could bring down half the power structure in Beverly Hills. David looked concerned. It's also incredibly dangerous. These people won't go down without a fight. Are we really ready for this? Esperanza stood up, pacing the small office. Do we have a choice? Now that we know about this, can we really turn a blind eye? This is the root of everything we've been fighting against. Before anyone could respond, Esperanza's phone rang. It was Victoria Goldstein. Esperanza, Victoria's voice was urgent. Something's happening. Robert just got a call emergency meeting of the Beverly Hills Business Association. But it sounded off. I think they know about your investigation. Esperanza's blood ran cold. How? We've only just started looking into this. I don't know, Victoria replied. But be careful. These people, they're not like us. They'll do anything to protect themselves. As she hung up, Esperanza turned to her friends. We need to move fast. If they know we have this information, they'll try to discredit us or worse. We need to get this to the authorities and the media before they can stop us. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of activity. Mark worked tirelessly to compile the evidence into a comprehensive report. David reached out to his contacts in law enforcement, trying to find someone they could trust with the information. Esperanza liaised with Jonathan at the Tribune, preparing to break the story. But as they worked, strange things began to happen. Esperanza's apartment was broken into, though nothing seemed to be taken. David reported being followed on his way to work. Mark's computer was hacked, though thankfully, he had kept the whistleblower files on an offline device. The pressure was mounting, and Esperanza could feel the noose tightening around them. But she was determined to see this through. Too many people were counting on them. Finally, everything was ready. They had arranged to meet with an FBI agent who specialized in public corruption cases, and Jonathan had prepared a special edition of the Tribune to break the story. All they had to do was make it through the next 24 hours. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. As Esperanza left the Alliance office late that night, a black SUV screeched to a halt beside her. Before she could react, two men in suits grabbed her, pushing her into the vehicle. Ms. Martinez, one of the men said as the SUV sped away, I believe we need to have a conversation about the future of Beverly Hills. Esperanza's heart raced, but she forced herself to remain calm. I don't know what you're talking about, she said evenly. The man smiled coldly. Oh, I think you do. Did you really think you could take on the circle and win? We built this city. We own this city. And no one, especially not some immigrant cook turned wannabe activist, is going to change that. As they drove through the darkened streets of Beverly Hills, Esperanza's mind worked furiously. She needed to buy time, to give David and Mark a chance to realize something was wrong and release the information. What do you want from me? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The man leaned forward. It's simple. You're going to make a statement. You'll admit that all your accusations were false, that you made everything up for attention. You'll apologize to the good people of Beverly Hills for causing such a disturbance. And then, if you're smart, you'll leave town and never come back. Esperanza felt a surge of anger. After everything she'd been through, everything she'd fought for, did they really think she would give up so easily? And if I refuse, she challenged. The man's smile turned predatory. Well, then things might get unpleasant. For you, for your friends at the Alliance, for poor Amanda Reeves and her family. It would be a shame if anything happened to them, wouldn't it? Esperanza's blood ran cold at the threat. These people were truly ruthless. But as she opened her mouth to respond, the SUV suddenly swerved violently. "What the dash!" the driver exclaimed as police sirens filled the air. In the chaos that followed, Esperanza realized that David must have followed her from the office, anticipating trouble. As the SUV spun out of control, she took advantage of her captor's distraction to grab the door handle and tumble out onto the street. She hit the pavement hard, rolling to absorb the impact as David had once taught her. As she scrambled to her feet, she saw David's car screech to a halt beside her. "Get in," he shouted, and Esperanza didn't need to be told twice. As they sped away, leaving the sound of sirens behind them, Esperanza finally allowed herself to breathe. "David," she gasped, "how did you know?" David's face was grim as he navigated the streets. "I've been keeping an eye on you since things started getting weird. When I saw that SUV grab you, I called for backup and followed." "Are you okay?" Esperanza nodded, though her whole body ached from the fall. "We need to release the information now. They're desperate, they'll do anything to stop us." David agreed, and as they drove, he called Mark, setting things in motion. By the time they reached a safe house David had prepared, the wheels were already turning. The next morning, Beverly Hills woke to a city in chaos. The Tribune special edition hit the stands, its headline screaming "Corruption Exposed, the Secret Network Controlling Beverly Hills." Simultaneously, the FBI launched a series of high-profile raids, targeting City Hall, businesses, and private residences. As Esperanza watched the news unfold from the safety of the safe house, she felt a mix of triumph and disbelief. They had done it. The circle was crumbling. But the fight was far from over. As the days passed and more details emerged, the full scope of the corruption became clear. It went beyond Beverly Hills, tentacles reaching into state politics and even federal agencies. Esperanza found herself at the center of a national conversation about power, privilege, and justice. She testified before grand juries and congressional committees, sharing her story and the stories of countless others who had been victimized by the circle's machinations. It wasn't easy. There were death threats, attempts to smear her character, and moments of doubt when the challenge seemed too great. But every time Esperanza considered giving up, she remembered the faces of the workers who had trusted her, the courage of Amanda Reeves, and the sacrifices made by her parents to give her a better life. Months turned into years as the legal battles played out. Some members of the circle turned on each other, hoping for leniency. Others fought tooth and nail, using their wealth and connections to drag out the proceedings. But slowly, surely, justice began to prevail. Corrupt officials were removed from office. Businesses that had profited from exploitation were held accountable. New laws were passed to protect workers and ensure transparency in local government. And through it all, Esperanza and the Workers' Justice Alliance continued their work. The spotlight of the scandal had brought attention to their cause, and they used that attention to push for broader reforms. 5 years after that fateful night when Esperanza had been kidnapped, she stood on the steps of Beverly Hills City Hall. A crowd had gathered to witness the unveiling of a new monument, a statue dedicated to the workers who had built and sustained the city. As Esperanza addressed the crowd, her voice strong and clear, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. "This statue is not just a tribute to the past," she said, her words carrying across the hushed gathering. "It is a promise to the future. A promise that in this city, in this country, every person's dignity will be respected. Every worker's rights will be protected. And no one, no matter how wealthy or powerful, is above the law." As the crowd erupted in cheers, Esperanza felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to see Victoria Goldstein, tears in her eyes. "Thank you," Victoria said softly, "for showing me the truth, for giving me a chance to make amends." Esperanza smiled, embracing her former employer turned ally. We all have the capacity to change, to grow. That's what this has all been about. As the celebration continued around them, Esperanza took a moment to look out over the city she had come to love. Beverly Hills had changed, and so had she. The humble cook who had arrived years ago with dreams of a better life had become a symbol of hope and a catalyst for change. But Esperanza knew that the work was far from over. There would always be those who sought to exploit others, to hoard power and wealth at the expense of the vulnerable. And so, she would continue to fight, to speak for those who couldn't speak for themselves. As the sun set over Beverly Hills, casting a golden glow over the new monument, Esperanza made a silent vow. She would never forget where she came from, the struggles she had faced, and the people who had believed in her. And she would use every day to build a world where everyone, regardless of their background or circumstances, had the chance to pursue their dreams. The story of Esperanza Martinez, the poor cook who had been fired and falsely accused, only to rise up and change an entire city, had become legend. But for Esperanza, it was just the beginning. There were more battles to fight, more lives to touch, more changes to make. And she was ready for whatever came next. As she stepped away from the podium, surrounded by friends, allies, and supporters, Esperanza felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had faced her greatest fears, stood up to seemingly insurmountable odds, and emerged victorious not just for herself, but for countless others. The journey had been long and fraught with danger, but it had led her to this moment, a moment of triumph, of justice, and of hope for the future. And as she looked out at the faces of those gathered, Esperanza knew that her story, and the stories of all those she had fought for, would continue to inspire generations to come. In that moment, standing tall beneath the golden California sun, Esperanza Martinez was no longer just a cook, or an activist, or even a hero. She was a testament to the power of one person to change the world, one small act of courage at a time. And so, as the crowd dispersed and the day drew to a close, Esperanza walked away from City Hall, not to rest on her laurels, but to prepare for the next challenge. For she knew that as long as there was injustice in the world, her work would never truly be done. But with the love of her community, the strength of her convictions, and the fire of determination that burned within her, Esperanza was ready to face whatever the future might hold. Her journey had taught her that with perseverance, compassion, and unwavering belief in what was right, anything was possible. And so, the legend of Esperanza Martinez, the poor cook who changed Beverly Hills, lived on, a beacon of hope for all who dared to dream of a better world.